Coming off the highly successful Silent Hill 2 remake, which released last year in 2024, Bloober Team has been riding a wave of praise from many who were once against them. With their newest game, Cronos The New Dawn, the studio aims to continue their winning streak. Within over 15 hours of my time with Cronos, it's become evident that Bloober Team's latest attempt at delivering a satisfying survival horror experience has fallen short. I should be clear when I say that this is not a bad game. However, it's far and away not a great one either. Chronos is a game that offers very little in the way of originality, and it suffers from several glaring issues, some of which I'm baffled that they made their way into the final product. Starting off with the story. You start the game as a nameless character known only as the Traveler, who also has what's akin to a badge number. You're given a target to hunt down, but the reason why you're hunting this target, or what this character is actually after, or what's happening at all in this world that Bloober has created, is left unexplained. And to be honest, there's not much that happens at all, but more on that later. The problems this game has rear their head immediately as soon as you're given control. First off, this Traveler character is boring. For nearly the entire game, it's unclear who you're playing as, and some players have even expressed that they were confused as to what the gender of the character even is. This is understandable to some extent, but to me it was clear that the main character is a woman due to the voice. And of course this was later confirmed late in the story. Now, the Traveler is wearing this suit with a fishbowl helmet that can only be compared to the likes of DC Comics' Black Manta or Spider-Man villain Mysterio. The helmet is translucent, so you can't actually see who's in the suit, but the identity of the Traveler is revealed at the very end of the game, just before the final stage leading to the endgame boss. And it's not much of a revelation. I saw it coming a mile away, which points out a bigger problem with this story, which is there's not much story here. And most of what you do throughout the runtime is hunt down targets. After you find the first target, you're then given another target to hunt down, and then after you find that target, you're given yet another target to hunt down. It's a very repetitive process, and it really doesn't lead to anything special. The payoff here with the story is just not there. The plot for this game can only be described as abstract. Everything is purposely vague, and the game goes out of its way to not answer questions about what's happening in the story regarding the point. For damn near the entire runtime, the game asks more questions than it answers. By the time you do reach the end of the game, the answers you're given are rather unsatisfactory because it's both silly and nonsensical, to the point where anyone who is rational would ask themselves why they even bothered playing this crap at all if this was the result they were going to get. That certainly was my reaction by the time the credits started rolling at the end. But the problems don't end there. While Chronos has effective atmosphere and art direction for a horror game, it ultimately falls short in the two most important departments: performance and gameplay. The performance with this game is one of the worst I've experienced all year. The stuttering is beyond awful. It got so bad that the game froze on me during one boss encounter and stayed frozen for what felt like 2 minutes. They got this strange V-Sync slider in the graphics menu, which is highly unusual. Normally, when you see the V-Sync option, you can either turn it on or you can keep it off. And typically, there is no slider accompanying the feature. In order to stabilize the frame rate, I kept having to switch between the third and fourth setting. And even then, I still received frame rate drops consistently. I don't know how they messed up the performance this much when the Silent Hill 2 remake ran much more smoothly last year. Cronos The New Dawn, from a gameplay perspective, can only be described as a cheap imitation of Dead Space's combat system, but its quality suffers due to several strange design choices. One of the primary problems is the way the enemies are designed. Most of the enemies in the game will bum rush you as soon as you enter their field of view. However, most are slow, and you can effectively deal with multiple targets in one encounter with relative ease if your aim is on point. The encounters, however, are not dynamic because the AI behavior almost never changes except for when they attempt to merge. Enemies on screen can merge with corpses of their fellow fallen and become a stronger entity. There are two problems with this. The first is that to stop the merging process is relatively easy. You can use a sticky grenade called a pyre, which will detonate near hostile targets, or you can use a torch fuel, a one-time use inventory item to scatter fire within your immediate vicinity to stun nearby enemies. However, if you have neither in your inventory, you can simply run up to enemies and hit them with your melee, which will produce the same result and stop the merging process. Just so as long as you're quick enough about it. The problem with this ability the monsters have is they can merge off screen to where you can't reach them in time, or even know where their exact position is, which leads to frustrating scenarios where you end up with a powerful enemy on screen that you may not have the tools to deal with at that moment. When an enemy does merge and become stronger, they usually also gain super armor, and are only vulnerable in one specific area on their body. This could be the head or one of their legs, for example. This wouldn't be a problem if the aiming was better, but the aiming in this game is not as smooth as what you have in Dead Space or the Resident Evil games. The main reason for this is due to the charge shot mechanic, where you can charge your shots at targets on screen. For what sounds like an innovative mechanic, quickly is revealed to be one of the game's primary mistakes. The charge shot can't be held down indefinitely, which was my problem with it. The shot automatically releases after it reaches the zenith of its charge. This means your aim with each shot must be perfect every single time. Otherwise, you'll miss shots and waste ammunition. Not only that, but the charge shot mechanic seems to slow down your aim. So if you're aiming at an enemy that's rushing to merge with another enemy, you can easily miss your target because they're moving horizontally, and your aim is too slow to catch up to them. They should have designed it to where each charge shot can be held down and stay active until the player chooses to release it, but if you could do that, then the game would be too easy, and that's clearly not what Bloober was going for. That's not even the biggest problem with the charge shot mechanic. The obvious problem with the charge shots in this game is that they're mandatory because the enemies are damage sponges. Standard gunfire deals so little damage that they become an obsolete option in any combat encounter. From the standard enemies all the way up to the bosses, I used the charge shot mechanic in every combat encounter throughout the entire game, as a result which limits the freedom of what the player can choose to do in the combat system. Why use the normal gunfire if it's not as powerful as the charge shots, which are infinitely more effective? Aside from the charge shot mechanic and the enemy behavior, another problem with the combat system is that the melee is damn near useless. Aside from utilizing it to stop enemies from merging and to combat weaker enemies, the melee in this game is too weak to be effective, especially if there's more than one enemy on screen, or you're dealing with one of the larger monsters whose health pools completely eclipse your melee damage output. All these problems are manageable, but there's one dire mistake that Bloober made that many have pointed out, that the game barely gives you any ammunition, which you need to engage with enemies in the first place. There are 3 ways you can acquire ammo in Cronos. The first is that you can find ammo in the environment. The second way is that you can buy it at an upgrade station. The third way allows the player to craft ammo if you have the necessary materials to do so. You must utilize all 3 methods to stay stocked, and even then, it's still difficult to maintain a strong ammunition inventory. Out of the 7 weapons in the game, I only found 4 of them. I utilized only 3 weapons for most of my runtime, which is the standard handgun, the shotgun, and a modified carbine rifle, which brings up another problem that makes little sense. The weapon you're using is called a shift blade. The shift blade is a gun that can morph into different weapons, but for some reason, the different forms that the gun can morph into takes up separate inventory slots on screen. Now, perhaps a reasonable explanation for this is that the mods are physical, since the traveler must find them and pick them up in order to use them, which means that they take up inventory space, despite the fact that the gun can shift into different forms. However, none of this is properly explained, which has left many players questioning why the different guns take up inventory space if the weapon you're using can literally transform. They should have taken inspiration from Remedy's Control, which also had the main character in that game using a weapon that could shapeshift, but it didn't take up inventory slots. That's just my view on that. Now, all 3 of the weapons I mainly used were effective and got the job done, but the ammunition was extremely scarce, even more so than other similar horror games, be them Dead Space or Resident Evil or The Last of Us, which even on the hardest difficulty settings, those games will make sure that the player has the necessary ammunition needed to get them through the game. When you combine this ammo scarcity issue with the inane lack of difficulty options, what you're left with is a survival horror game that will turn off most casual players who make up the bulk of the sales for these types of games. And even some hardcore players such as myself will be left scratching their head wondering just what the hell this developer was thinking. The mistakes that Bloober Team has made with Cronos The New Dawn is highly aggravated because they're so amateur. Ridiculous ammo scarcity, lack of difficulty options, vague abstract storytelling, questionable combat mechanics, lazy enemy design, almost zero puzzle solving, no side missions, etc. These are the mistakes of a novice development studio. Bloober Team at this point is not an amateur studio, that's the new kid on the block. This is a professional development studio with years of experience that knows how to make AAA video games for mass consumption. There's no reason why this game should have the issues that it has. This, for me personally, will go down as one of 2025's biggest disappointing releases because after the brilliance of the Silent Hill 2 remake, I expected better from this game and from this studio. But it's easy to remake a game where the blueprint has already been laid out for you, where the level design, art direction, musical scores, story, and characters have already essentially been made. And all the development team has to do is modernize everything and upgrade all of those elements together for a modern audience. It's much harder to deliver on a new IP that isn't just a derivative clone of something else that's already popular. And that's the biggest downfall of Cronos The New Dawn. It's just another lesser version of Dead Space, an old classic that I would much rather play again over this new thing that fumbles the ball with every chance it gets.